Who would you consider the most absolutely evil group of people in all of history? I would be willing to bet that 9 out of 10 people would say the Nazis were the most evil group of people to ever exist. But what if I told you there was a Nazi responsible for saving the lives of over 200,000 people? In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Nazi John Rabe, his role in the Nanking Massacre, and cognitive dissonance theory. Why most people are better than you give them credit for, even your greatest enemies, and why most people see themselves as the hero in their own story. It's 1937 Germany, and the Nazis are on the brink of plunging the world into turmoil once again. The Japanese have just finished a decades-long push for industrialization after the embarrassment of the Matthew Perry expedition almost a century earlier, where American Commander Matthew Perry blasted his way into Japan to force them to become an open port for trade. The Japanese, embarrassed by their inability to defend the modernized American fleet, realized that they had to become a superpower along with all the other developing nations. And in parodying those other world powers, what did they begin to do? Invade other countries. And they decided to start with China. After battling in Shanghai, the Japanese pushed onwards towards the capital of Nanking, China. Over the next several weeks, they raped, pillaged, and murdered the citizens of Nanking in one of history's most gruesome and concentrated acts of violence. Although the total death toll is debated because the Japanese destroyed most of the documents of the battles, it's estimated that 300,000 Chinese lost their lives during the massacre. There's one man, however, credited for being the catalyst for saving nearly 200,000 Chinese lives, and that is the Nazi John Rabe. A German businessman and Nazi Party member, Rabe was stationed in China as an official ambassador from the Nazi Party and was a deputy group leader, which was a fairly high-ranking position within the Nazi Party itself. After living there for several years, Rabe had become quite integrated into the Chinese culture and was very fond of the Chinese people. So when the Japanese began their invasion, Rabe was very quick to react and began housing Chinese citizens in his home. But then he set up what was known as the Nanking Safe Zone. Along with other foreigners who had power and influence, they set up a designated area where the Japanese were not allowed to go, and this led to about 200,000 people's lives being spared. It's not strange to hear of stories of people standing up for what's right, but what is strange that someone like John Rabe was a member of the Nazi Party. His beloved Nazis would go on to start World War II and be responsible for the Holocaust. So how could someone who shared political ideals with someone like Hitler be the savior of the Chinese people during the massacre? There are so many interesting lessons that we could take from this story, but I want to focus on two things. First is cognitive dissonance theory, and the second is the idea that most people at heart are good people. Cognitive dissonance theory can help us in part explain why people do bad things, and the second concept that most people are good explains why people who do bad things aren't necessarily bad people. So let's get into it. Cognitive dissonance theory is a theory that states that people need to maintain a cognitive consistency to help them preserve a positive self-image. This can also extend beyond the individual, where someone would support a system or structure within society that helps them maintain that positive self-image, even if that structure oppresses other groups of people. In simpler terms, and using Nazi Germany as an example, Hitler was able to convince the German people that the Jewish population was responsible for all of the societal and economic problems that Germany was experiencing. In doing so, people were able to maintain their positive self-image despite the fact that the Nazis were doing terrible things to the Jewish population. By making the Jewish population the villains in this particular scenario, people felt like they were doing the right thing by participating in their oppression or turning a blind eye. Of course, this is an oversimplification of the things that led to the Holocaust, but it does help understand generally how it got to that point. While we might be quick to group everyone who was a Nazi into the category of being a bad person, I think it speaks more to the pressures and the way we are affected by society and our peers and those around us in our environment in general. In the case of John Rabe, he obviously subscribed to the basic tenets of the Nazi Party, but when removed from that culture, his true self was able to flourish. He even wrote to Hitler begging for help in defending against the Japanese invaders. This tells me that people aren't good or bad inherently, that they are very heavily influenced by their surroundings, their environment, and also many times people are slaves to authority. If you want to learn more about the concept of how ordinary people can be turned bad or this slavery to authority, I would highly recommend the book Ordinary Men, Reserve Battalion 101 and the Final Solution by Christopher Browning. It's a book that details how ordinary German citizens were turned into death squads in Nazi Germany. So to simplify, cognitive dissonance is the state of holding two conflicting ideas simultaneously and how our ego can't handle that. So we will subconsciously work very hard to keep ourselves from that state, even if it means doing bad things. We all see ourselves as the hero in our story. Aside from sociopaths and serial killers, very few people intentionally do things to harm others or take pleasure in doing something that they know is wrong. A classic example would be a starving, homeless person who might be stealing food from a restaurant or a shop. While we think of theft as generally bad, that person has no other choice, and they are seeing themselves as a hero in that situation because they are saving their own life. They are maintaining their own health and well-being. You can also see these concepts pop up in the form of gaslighting. Gaslighting is where you make someone else out to be the villain in a story. That way you feel less guilt when you mistreat them or wrong them. You can see this happen sometimes in romantic relationships where someone might take something very small and blow it out of proportion, and then they use that as an excuse to break up with their partner, where in reality they wanted to break up with that person anyway, but maybe felt guilty about it. And that way they feel a little less guilt because they say, oh, I had a very good reason for doing this. They don't have to confront the fact that, hey, I just don't want to be with this person anymore. That makes them feel like a bad person. And to maintain their positive self-image, they find a reason to not like that person, to break off that relationship. And speaking from personal experience, I had a situation where someone was spreading absolutely vicious lies about me. And at the time, I could not for the life of me understand why someone would do that. But in retrospect, it became very clear that this person needed me to be the villain in their story because they were about to wrong me for their own benefit. And normally they would have felt very guilty about doing that, but because I was the villain, they could ease their conscience and maintain that positive self-image. To them, it didn't matter that what they did was wrong or unethical because I deserved it in their eyes because I was the villain to them in that situation. Now, does that make them a bad person? Your gut reaction will probably be to say yes, but I don't think it's that simple. In most cases, I think even this person who was spreading lies about me, 9 times out of 10 would do the right thing in most situations. There's so many different factors that can influence the outcomes of every different situation. And if we look throughout history, no one is black and white, good or evil. Even some of the most positive figures in history have fatal flaws, such as Mahatma Gandhi was a racist. Martin Luther King cheated on his wife. We have almost all the really prominent figures at the start of this nation owning slaves and doing other really unethical things. So it's never as simple as this person is good and this person is bad. So there's 2 things I want you to take away from this video. Number 1, remember that we all see ourselves as the hero in our own stories. And that means we're probably not as virtuous as we like to think that we are. And it's normal to have these cognitive blind spots, but you should always be working to destroy them. Because at the end of the day, being more aware of yourself is going to give you a much better perspective on life and just make you a better person. And secondly, I think it's important to remember that if you feel malice towards somebody, try to keep in mind that whatever they did to you was probably a very small piece to the much larger puzzle that is their life. And most of the time, it's a side effect, it's not intentional. Now, that doesn't excuse the behavior, but having a little more leeway for people will probably bring you more happiness and more resolution and peace, which is always a good thing. So that's it for this video. If you do want to learn more about the Nanking Massacre, I would highly recommend the book, The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang. This event was so important to history, but is often overlooked because World War II and the Holocaust happened right after and definitely overshadowed this event, but that doesn't make it any less important. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, no gurus, no masters.